Nietzsche is often characterized as the edgy, atheist philosopher, or the anti-Christian philosopher, but his pagan influence is almost entirely ignored. Much of Nietzsche's philosophy grew out of his investigation of the values of the European pagans, which he characterized as healthy, vital, and life-affirming. He repeatedly called himself a disciple of Dionysus, and said that in the secret of the Dionysian mysteries, in the idea of immortality being found in the continual intergenerational rebirth of biological life rather than the immortal soul, he had found the path to a truly life-affirming worldview. In Will to Power, he even refers to himself as a pagan, saying, "We pagans in faith, we are the first to truly understand what a pagan faith is." But in this video, I'm not going to argue that Nietzsche was some sort of devout pagan offering sacrifices to the old gods, or that all of his philosophy agrees with the European pagan worldview. Nietzsche was his own man with his own novel philosophy. Instead, I hope that I will be able to show you that in his idea of the will to power, Nietzsche articulated the fundamental metaphysical principle, which is the foundation of the European pagan worldview. That is the religious and moral worldview held in common across Europe before Christianity and before Platonism and various other philosophies began to dominate the classical world. This is the worldview which we see exemplified in Homer and in the Norse sagas, in Irish heroic literature, and more. So what exactly is the will to power? People will often assume that Nietzsche is making the claim that everyone is simply motivated by the cold desire for power, political power, or power over others, which is not the case at all. Nietzsche does make the claim that people tend to hold worldviews and values which facilitate their flourishing, which is only common sense. But this is downstream from Nietzsche's much more profound idea of the will to power as the driving force, the fundamental essence of biological life. The will to power is not meant to describe a specific thing, power, which people seek after and prioritize over love or any number of other things. Instead, it is meant to describe the nature of biological life. And what do we mean by nature? We can trace the etymology of the word nature back to the Latin natura, originally coming from the verb to birth, which meant the essential qualities or innate disposition of a thing. And we still use the word in this way today. When we refer to someone's nature, we are referring to their fundamental essential characteristics, to the tendencies of behavior which they were born with. Similarly, we can refer more generally to human nature, that is, the nature, the essential qualities, the essential modes of behavior common to all of mankind. But it doesn't stop there. We can keep getting more broad. All mammals share a similar nature. This is why we can relate better to dogs than to, let's say, scorpions. This is why we recognize ourselves in monkeys and even cats. So what happens when we ask what nature is common to all living organisms? Is there some essential essence or mode of behavior which all living organisms share? Nietzsche's answer is yes, and he calls it the will to power. All living organisms seek expansion, growth, the fulfillment of their organism's potential, and the mastery of their environment. The tree stretches its branches up towards the light, growing taller and taller, consuming as much nutrients as it can, often to the detriment of other trees and plants since resources are limited, until eventually entropy wins out. And it is the same with people. People consume nutrients, often in the form of other animals, and it is turned into muscle and bone tissue. As we mature, we grow stronger and taller. We seek to exercise our strength and master our environment. And we can see that all organisms, no matter how small, are governed by this same essential drive, by this same process of consumption and growth. So we can see that Nietzsche's idea of the will to power is a fundamentally biological idea. It is not describing some cold Machiavellian drive to power which we all harbor and conceal in our hearts, nor is it reductionistic and mechanistic. This will to power can be expressed in any number of ways, in various instincts and various behaviors, through reproduction, but it can also be expressed through laughter, through dancing, through fun, and through play. We become depressed when we are confined, imprisoned, unable to explore and master our environment, unable to express our abilities, our powers, unable to discharge the energy of our instincts, unable to express the full potential of our being and to test our abilities against the world, because our deepest, most fundamental instinct is the drive towards growth, towards expansion, towards mastery. And all things, reproduction, war, and art are an extension of this nature. Life does not seek to merely survive. Now let's turn to the European Pagan worldview. To keep things simple, I'm going to stick to 4 essential ideas, which were essential to the European Pagan worldview and are all interconnected. The idea of excellence or heroism, the idea of custom or virtue, the idea of nature, and the idea of fate. We can tell that these ideas were central to the European pagan worldview more broadly because we see them in the Norse sagas, which were written down around 1000 AD, and in Homer, which was written down around 800 BC, but had existed before then as an oral tradition. So these texts, which preserve for us the European pagan worldview, are both geographically and temporally distant, and yet we see in them the exact same ideas about heroism, fate, nature, and custom or law. So firstly, what exactly is a hero? Someone like Achilles or Sigurd. There's someone who seeks excellence and achieves excellence, who performs great feats and overcomes great obstacles, and who exhibits all the markers of flourishing life: beauty, physical strength, and mental sharpness. So a hero is essentially someone who possesses a heightened will to power. They are the tallest tree in the forest. They excel in all ways. They are the best. In these cultures, it was all of the markers and the fruits of excellence which were considered good. However, this does not mean that they adhered to some kind of Darwinian might makes right philosophy. They had morals, laws, codes of custom. In the Iliad and the Odyssey, Zeus is the god of the suppliant. He will defend the rights of the suppliant and the stranger. And if you abuse someone who is a guest in your household or is supplicating himself to you, there will be repercussions. Zeus will enforce these laws. However, even though men and the gods enforce these laws, they had the idea that these laws were imposed over the fundamental reality of nature, which is governed by the will to power, by the amoral struggle of all against all. This is what Achilles means when Hector asks for a proper burial in accordance with custom, and Achilles replies, "There are no pacts between lions and men, no peace between wolves and sheep." He is saying that in nature there are no laws and customs. Nature is a free-for-all. It is governed by the will to power, and there are no guarantees of cooperation or mercy. And it is the same with the hero. He imposes virtue upon himself to direct his nature. But it is fundamentally his nature which makes him a hero, which drives him towards excellence. And this brings us to the idea of fate, which Nietzsche flirted with when he wrote against the existence of free will. In the European pagan view, everyone is bound by a fate which they cannot escape. And this fate is usually tied to the hero's nature. In the saga of the Volsungs, when Volsung is warned about an impending ambush, he says that he swore an oath in the womb to never flee from iron or fire. He cannot flee because his nature will not allow him to. And in Greek mythology, we see that certain fates, certain tendencies of behavior can be passed from generation to generation, can be tied to a specific bloodline. as is the case with the curse of the house of Atreus. Just as species are bound to a certain range of behaviors which are tied to their nature, a dog cannot fly or stand up on its hind legs and start speaking. Individuals can only exhibit a certain spectrum of behavior which is tied to their nature, and that nature determines how they live their life and what fate they eventually meet. So I think that we can see that Nietzsche's idea of the will to power is the unarticulated metaphysical principle underlying the European worldview. That is to say, the fundamental presupposition about the world, the nature of the world, and the nature of life, upon which everything else rests. The fundamental metaphysical idea behind Christianity, for example, is that the world began in a perfect state without death, that we are fallen into a world of sin and death, and that we can be restored to the original state of perfection and immortality through Christ. If this is not the case, then all of the rest of Christian theology and morality crumbles. And I think that in his idea of biological life as the will to power, and the world more generally as the will to power, we didn't have time to get into that here, Nietzsche may have been the first to articulate the metaphysical principle underlying the European pagan worldview in philosophical terms. If you're interested in learning more about the European pagan worldview, about the ideas of heroism, nature, and fate, I have an ongoing heroic literature course which you will find linked in the description. I started with the Iliad and I'm making my way through the Greco-Roman epic cycle. Then I will cover the Norse sagas, Irish literature, and finally Arthurian literature. The course is in the form of audio episodes, usually 30 minutes to an hour, and it comes with a reading list, recommended translations, and historical background. I'm essentially trying to give you the value of a college course, but more interesting, more convenient, and a lot cheaper. So check it out if you're interested.
Thank you for your support. It makes this channel possible.